If you got wedding plans on your agenda for 2026, you're excited for it, first off, congratulations. But second, maybe consider planning through Simply Eloped. They've planned over 14,000 personalized ceremonies in 37 beautiful U.S. destinations. You've got enough on your plate for next year, so let Simply Eloped coordinate every detail with care. All you got to do is bring the marriage license. Create your kind of wedding at simplyeloped.com. Today on CityCast Chicago. Last week, the Bears unceremoniously announced that they have widened their stadium search to Northwest Indiana. And obviously, there are people who have thoughts, including myself. But let's be real, this is just another chapter in a long political back and forth that we have seen play out time and time again. But with other teams currently embarking on their own stadium projects, we think it's important we take a step back and ask, is there another way Chicago could be approaching these developments? It's Monday, December 22nd. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. I'm joined today by Michael Wood with the Chicago Architecture Center, and he was the co-lead on their report, Win-Win, the new game plan for urban stadiums. Michael, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Thanks for having me.
As you point out in the report, 5 professional men's sports teams are in some phase of stadium development. You got the Bears, obviously. The Sox lease is up in 2029, and they've been floating, maybe strong-arming in some conversations, new ideas. The Fire are building a new stadium at the 78 around the South Loop, and the Blackhawks and Bulls owners are working on a new development around the United Center. My first question is, what's the reason all of these are happening at the same time, if there is a reason?
Well, there's certainly a degree of serendipity there. Teams are becoming more and more sophisticated. Teams are looking further out, trying to understand how they can grow their brand, grow their business, how they can increase dwell time. The pressures are somewhat shared across leagues. And the fact that there are sites that are in play, whether they're sites that are owned or whether they're what we call mega developments, which are the very large, accrued, vacant, usually former industrial sites that ring the downtown, makes it enticing because there's sort of large pockets of land where a new stadium could go. Some of the teams that are really killing it right now have new stadiums, have new strategies about how to boost the dwell time of their fans. And in today's environment, pocketing that kind of entertainment dollar is generally not subject to league revenue sharing rights. So it goes right into the pocket of teams. And so now that there's sort of a new mousetrap, a lot of teams are saying, how do I get involved?
So there's a lot of desire at the team level. And I know in making and developing this report, you all talk to a lot of community and corporate partners. What do you think the appetite is for these various projects?
Whew. That really depends who you're talking to. I'd say maybe at the highest level, though, we seem to be at a moment where the growth and the interest in live entertainment is really terrific. You know, whether that means like music acts, these sort of mega concerts that are like so large as to shape economies and be courted by heads of state, or whether it's the NFL that just seems to grow and take every day of the week. People are really interested in it. We have some suspicions that are really not scientific, but people are working more and more from home. Technology has us more and more atomized. And the idea that you could go into a shared space and see something live where it's unscripted and you don't know what the outcome is and people come from all walks of life, that has a lot of appeal right now.
I mean, over here at CityCast, we have been pretty cynical about these various stadium development proposals, concerns about displacement, public financing. So what are the actual tangible benefits to having a stadium in your neighborhood or nearby?
The suspicion is founded in some cases. And it really is probably coming on the heels of either bad deals or coming on the idea that city government is responding to a proposal by a team. And then, even further downstream from that, you have a community responding to a proposal or to renderings or to a grand vision. And it seems everyone's on their back foot except for the team in that particular kind of context. We also have now decades of data that show that the kind of rosy economic multiplier effects that stadiums would have, they don't really bear out. They do what economists would call more of like a shift share. So the pie is the same, but the dollars are moving from one place to another, not necessarily net growth.
We talk about some of that skepticism, and some of it is often around how deals are done. Can you kind of talk a little insider baseball here? How do stadium deals normally cross the finish line, and what's different about the Chicago model you put forward in the report? Because for a lot of people listening, it's as simple as billionaires threaten to move teams or that the teams won't be successful and ultimately they get what they want.
Oh, every deal's a little different, but if you want to generalize, we have just lived through a long period of time where a stadium is municipally owned and there's like a tenant landlord situation set up, and inevitably there's a lot of brinksmanship, and then a deal comes together at the 11th hour, and then we all breathe a sigh of relief and we build a stadium, right? And then we get to the end of that mortgage, that sort of 20, 25, 30-year horizon, and the team says, oh, this doesn't serve us anymore. We need a new stadium. And at that point, several things could happen. They could raise the capital for a new stadium. They could be so beloved that a neighborhood says, whatever you want. They could be aggrieved. They could leave under cover of night. Any number of things could happen. But that kind of tenant landlord setup is often at the heart of what we're responding to. That's not entirely indicative of how things are being done today. People have wised up a bit. And as we go into in our report a little bit, the entry of private equity into pro sports in the kind of middle part of the aughts, that has sort of changed the game. That is moved sports into even bigger business. And it's really put family-run businesses, which were sort of the beginning of pro sports, into a different bucket.
And when we talk about this Chicago model, this maybe newer way of doing things, what does that look like for the various teams right now lobbying for new stadiums?
Yeah, so what we're trying to say with the Chicago model is that we're looking at this wrong. That the idea that teams would come forward with a proposal and that we would respond to it, that really we should be reversing that. And that the way a stadium deal should get done is, instead of teams driving negotiations while the government reacts, the city should really be building frameworks for development. We should be coordinating resources, and we should ensure that stadiums anchor thriving communities. So it's not just a philosophical change. It really requires setting out different capabilities than most cities have, in thinking that this is city building with a stadium as an anchor. This isn't a one-off negotiation for one business in one bespoke facility. We looked all over, and we really kind of came to the conclusion that what you see at Wrigley Field is something that makes a lot of sense in terms of an urban asset in an actual neighborhood where people work and go to school and go out to dinner, whether there's a game night or no game night. And we really based the urban design principles around what we're seeing in Wrigley and in Lakeview, not because they are incredibly novel or brand new ways of thinking about cities. In fact, they're very common workaday ways of building cities. They just happen to not often be followed when you're building an enormous stadium in this kind of finely tuned, very specific building for a very specific purpose. So at the top of our list is sort of transit first and always, that there need to be lots of ways to get in and out of a stadium and to get there. And ideally, if you can get there by public transit, it's going to be more for everybody. And the investments in transit don't just get fans there on game day, but they get people to and from all sorts of things like work and life for decades to come. Transit, in particular mass transit, then lead to density. And density is the thing that can really make something like a stadium anchor something larger like a neighborhood. And so bringing people together, whether it's lots of private businesses, whether it's businesses with housing above it, whether it's open space and parks, and that makes for our third principle, which is walkability. And part of the joy of any urban neighborhood is that you can get from A to B, and it's actually a pleasurable walk. There are things to entice you along the way. When you're walking, there's a destination in mind. You know when you get to your destination. All these things that walkability does goes hand in hand with a dense environment. And we really want to preach what we see in Wrigley is connection and not isolation. So it's amazing that you can walk or you could drive a car right up to the front door at Wrigley. There's not a sea of parking around it. It's connected everywhere you want to go. If you need a bus, if you need a train, if you need to walk somewhere, if you need to get picked up by a ride. The fifth principle is to keep public spaces public. Keep them for everyone. They really need to do lots of things. They can't just be for ticket holders on a game day. And then, it's a windswept plaza when there's no game. They need to be public spaces because that's how people see one another. That's where fun things happen. And probably most critically is the sixth design principle, which is time, that you need to be patient. And you're talking about incredibly large, incredibly expensive developments that take sometimes decades to build. So we really want to preach patience and a build over time mentality. And that's what kind of changes the view from a stadium to neighborhood development, which is what we're after and why we would like to see more city-led development in this enterprise.
Was affordability ever a part of this conversation? For me, as somebody who loves these teams, getting to a Bears or a Bulls or a White Sox game, that costs a lot of money. Getting to the neighborhood, no matter how well it's developed, in my experience inside, was that ever a part of what the future of stadium looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We only tackle that in indirect ways, and let me explain why. A big part of the report is that whenever possible, in most cases, teams should finance their own stadiums. And in most cases, teams know what is best for their business, and they should deliver the product that most meets their need. Increasingly, we see teams that understand that affordability is important to their product, whether that mean transit that can save, a bundle on what parking looks like, or whether that means thinking about food prices so that the fan experience is affordable. I think it is top of mind for teams, but teams have to deal with that. The city has to think about how does that stadium meet the city surrounding it? Are the public plazas for everyone? Are they safe? Are they monitored? Are they inviting? Are they activated? Do people want to build around it? Because the long-term fulcrum for us is always going to be gains in property tax. So what I'd like to say about this report is it is meant to take a broad view. It is not meant to think about the cost of a ticket today for one person, even though that's a totally real and legitimate concern. That's largely the domain of teams.
On the surface, the Chicago model seems, and as you talk through it, very much like common sense, build stadiums in concert with neighborhoods so that they remain walkable, accessible, lots of amenities outside the game. And like you said, the city should be leading discussions. When we think about the developing projects across those 5 teams, is that what we're seeing happen right now, or are they still following the old model?
That's a great question. I think we're seeing some of it. In some cases, deals have not come together yet, so we're not sure what we're seeing. And I would caution that in every one of these instances, you're talking about such a long timeline that you're not going to see it in the next year or two. So what's probably most important when you think about something like the White Sox is they have 3 years left on their lease. So at the end of those 3 years, all of the land surrounding that stadium is state-owned land. It's public land. So in 3 years' time, there's the chance to renew a lease. Are we going to think about it again as a stadium and a set of parking lots? Or are we going to maybe change that view and think about that as land that could be developed into a thriving mixed-use neighborhood, could bring housing and services to a part of town that could welcome it? We don't know. Now is the time to start setting forward what we think good looks like. And I'll just offer, I mean, we could go through all of these, but with the museum campus and the Bears, I just mentioned that because that's the other stadium that publicly has been funded, right? So the outstanding, about $400 million in outstanding debt is owned by us, right? So for both Rate Field and for Soldier Field. But we own it. So whether the Bears stay or the Bears go, that's the city, that's our issue. And it's paid for through hotel and entertainment taxes. So we're going to keep paying it off. And we need Museum Campus to be a working part of town that services everybody on game day or non-game day. And I think we're going to see that it works out, but it's not clear yet what direction the Bears will go.
I mean, how do you think the process with the Chicago Fire? Because at least from my perspective, that feels one that was sort of proposed by the owner, will be funded by the owner. Like the rendering sort of came out as people were finding out about this. Some would argue that the city council moved pretty quickly to kind of approve and push that forward. I literally can see it out of my window in the room I'm sitting in right now. It's across the street from me. And so, it's the South Loop. This neighborhood has, is already developed in a lot of ways, a lot of housing and small businesses around here. And so how do you think that process is moving thus far?
Well, there are a few ways to think about that. And if residents are concerned or want to keep tabs on it, who could blame them? It's an enormous endeavor. It will be a construction site for several months, and it will be a constantly evolving site for a couple of decades, right? So you're living in a dynamic situation in that regard. A stadium was always part of the potential uses in the planned development for that space. It is currently vacant space, so it fits a stadium, and a stadium does make a lot of sense in terms of location and use. The challenge is going to be what grows up around it? How inviting is that space for everyone, for those who are there for a game or for an event inside that stadium or not? How much really, in a sense, does it become a cherished place for people? Yeah. And at the moment, you have, I think, a benevolent owner. I think you have a talented developer. I think you have engaged elected officials in that area. You certainly will have a very caring and engaged set of community partners. So everything is there for it to work. But people are going to have to be patient. And they're going to have to be smart about understanding, how does this work in 25 years, in 50 years? Are we building something that the entire city will learn how to grow up around?
Residents have voiced and will continue to voice concern from the South Loop to Chinatown, where,
and they should,
as they worry about increased rents and parking accommodations, and when we talk about an owner like Mansueto, who is, going to put up, $600 million plus, I think back to the report where you all use the Wrigley 2.0 as an example of kind of a development they're looking for, but it feels like in some ways it may ignore the fact that the Ricketts just kind of did a lot of this private development on their own, that they've been aggressively kind of moved some small businesses out as land was purchased up. At the moment, it's definitely used in a sort of neighborhood and community way. And then you got some who complain about the Nashvilleification of parts of the area. And so what does it mean in situations where the owners still control a lot of not only what happens with the stadium, but with what the neighborhood around it looks like?
Two very different situations. And with the Cubs, I think the Ricketts ownership team was very clear from the get-go that the stadium was part and parcel of their dream of ownership, and that they were going to plow lots of money into keeping it going. And getting a championship was the true north for that project, which is not to say anything about, look, you got a $4.5 billion business in a neighborhood setting, and not everything works out perfectly on every detail. But that ownership team was pretty clear that we're here to invest in this place, and in the team that occupies this place. With Mansueto, it's a blank slate right now. I mean, the land itself is a blank slate, but that doesn't mean there aren't neighbors around it. And, it's going to be very important that the design principles that they adhere to in building out that neighborhood, that they really keep top of mind that they should be building for the everyday, not just for game day. The question is not whether we spend on infrastructure, but do we spend wisely? Is it easy to get there? Is it enjoyable when you're there? And, we really have to keep the feet to the fire that they build something that we're all very proud of, that you want to pass down to future generations.
To your point, this entire conversation is generational in nature. A lot of these construction projects will carry well into the 2030s. What do you think is at stake here for Chicago? Why is it so important for the city to meet this moment?
There are a lot of ways to answer that. At the top of the ticket is balance. The whole city is not for sports, and the city should include sports. So how do you build the neighborhoods that people want to live in and frequent and patron? That's important, right? But increasingly, the way we fund infrastructure, particularly transit, it's so fickle. It takes all sorts of sources from local, county, state, federal, from federal, that we don't always control. And something as popular and something as big a driver as a stadium can often be a lever for that. We should not take that lightly. Some of these properties have been sitting vacant for a really long time for a reason. And if we can get them back on the rolls, and if we can do it in a way that also meets community needs, we should be thrilled that we have this many teams that are largely locally owned, and that can set a path for future teams to follow too. That this is not going to be the last stadium deal. And part of the Chicago model is sort of saying, let's get organized now. Let's get teams responding to build where we need it, where we have a plan to see neighborhood or economic growth. There's a lot on the line. And I do think, particularly with the Bears, there's a little bit of a reputation issue there, that they're such a storied franchise and they have such a postcard location that if that were to change, that's a big change. And we're going to have to manage that change. And we're going to have to worry about this city's narrative being defined by people who don't live here. So there's a lot to lean into, and we need to coordinate all of the investments so that we actually build neighborhoods that people want to use. And the best way to know that you're successful is for people to be there on a game day, but they're not there for a game. They're there for some totally different reason. That lets you know you're building something for everybody.
Michael Wood is the Director of Civic and Industry Affairs with the Chicago Architecture Center. I appreciate you making time for CityCast Chicago today.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get out of here, I got a quick favor to ask you. CityCast Chicago and Hey Chicago have been nominated for Best Podcast and Best Email Newsletter as part of the Chicago Readers Best of 2025. If you've been here for a little bit, then this probably sounds familiar to you, because for the last 4 years, the podcast has won the award. And not to sound greedy, but we love to just keep this thing going. The truth is, this is an award voted on by fans of the podcast, people who have made time for us and believe that what we're doing is, worth a little bit of attention, a little bit of accolade. We'll take it. We appreciate the compliment. We're going to drop links for you in our show notes. Speaking of show notes, that's also where you're going to find some good news. If you are looking for something fun to do later this week, consider popping over to the Chosen Few DJs holiday party. They're going to have house music on 2 floors this Friday at Bourbon on Division. And remember, we gonna be here bright and early tomorrow. But of course, we're gonna take off a few days this week. But I'll remind you of that tomorrow. I appreciate you. Peace.